Okay, just doing a quick audio test. Barbara, since you're here, would you want to tell me if you can hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then as I'm going to continue to have urban hosts.
Oh, I think I need to be a co-host.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just made you a. I don't see how to fix this. Here's like a 2-foot long cord. Be as close to the wall as possible.
Yeah.
Still perform, but we've got time. So you might help me out. So yes, preferences. I only have one USB-C. Okay. Do you have a preference of OWL or screen? I have everything up on the screen. So if it's easier. Yeah. I can do the OWL. That's fine. You worry about battery? A little bit, but I think I should be okay. Okay. See, there used to be an HDMI to HDMI, but it looks like they're all HDMI to USB. Okay. Okay. Do you want me to just take it out? Yeah. Okay, testing the mic again. Testing one more time.
I can hear you.
Thank you, Zach. Of course. That was perfect timing to get all of our members promoted, so all good. Sure. All right, I think we are good to.
Howdy.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good.
You are just in time for us to get started.
Oh, perfect.
Our meeting. Oh, should I start the recording again? No, it is recording.
It should be automated.
All right, I'm just gonna close the door, so we don't have any noise. On my laptop and hope that it has enough battery. Okay, welcome everybody to our February meeting of the Pedestrian Transit Advisory Committee. We are going to get started with some procedural things as always. Who is our acting secretary for tonight? Awesome, thank you, Rob. You have the meeting template and everything? Fantastic, thank you. Let's start with the roll call of our members, and then guests, I will have you introduce yourselves when we get there, and I'll tell you how we do that. But we'll start with members. Ted Alexander cannot be here tonight. Ginny Alverson, I do not see. Caroline Bodiger, I also do not see. Meredith Brown. Meredith, I do see you there.
Yeah, sorry, I just got promoted to panelist. Hi.
Sorry, horrible timing, thank you. That's okay. Laura Evans,
Hello.
Christopher Ferry,
Here.
Preston Gutelius. Satoka Hirai,
Here.
Brenda Marvin,
Here.
Steve Mulder,
Yes, here.
Barbara Myers,
Here.
Bianca Norkunas.
Yeah.
Here. Vitor Pamplona,
Here.
Zach Rosenberg,
Here.
Alessandra Sider, I am here, Rob Stansel.
Here.
And Carol Bugaras, who I do not see. Our ex officio members, our esteemed city councilor Willem Baugh is not here. Kate White, here, and Justin Schreiber from Mobility cannot be here tonight. Okay, moving on to our guests. For those of you in person, I will go around, and then we'll get to the folks online, but please say your name, your board, and why you're here tonight. We'll start with Mackenzie.
Hi, I'm Mackenzie. I'm in Ward 2. I'm just interested in pedestrian and transit activities, and I recently got rid of my car, so trying to get more involved in the community. So yeah.
Amazing. Thanks for being here.
Howdy, I'm Julian. I also live in Ward 2. I plan to go into urban planning as a career, and I bike, I walk, and I use transit, so I figured I might as well show up.
Amazing. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, for those of you online, the guests with us, I'm gonna say your name, and then you should see a little button pop up that tells you that you can unmute. And when you do that, again, just say your name, your ward, and why you're here tonight. So I'll start with Eric Treble. Eric, you should be able to unmute now.
Hey everyone, I am an interested neighbor just trying to find out a little more about what goes on in these types of meetings.
Awesome, thank you for being here. Hopefully you will find out by being here. Let's move on to Joel, one of our frequent guests.
Hi, Joel Paul, Ward 4, and these are always very interesting and informative.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Joel. Good to see you. And then finally, Phil Hood. Phil, you should be able to unmute now. Phil, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you. All right, well, we will note that you are here. And hopefully, if you have any comments during the meeting, any audio issues get worked out by then. Okay, let us move on in our agenda. Thank you all for being here. Does anybody have comments or suggested edits on the January minutes? Okay, seeing none, I move to approve them. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Brenda. All in favor of approving the January minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
I.
Aye.
All opposed? Beautiful. I just want to quickly run through some upcoming meeting logistics. This is going to be our last meeting in the library. March will probably be a virtual only meeting just due to difficulties finding an in-person space. But we operated virtual only for like 3 years, so we should be able to do it again for a month. And then in April, we'll start meeting at 101 South Street in Boynton Yards. The address will be on the agenda and up online for the next meeting. And it's near Union Square near the T-stop. So that'll be kind of our meeting space indefinitely moving forward. And we'll still start at 6:30, so same time. And then kind of looking even further out, in June, we did have our meeting scheduled for Juneteenth, but we are going to reschedule that for the 12th. It's been moved on the PTAC calendar, but just in case you're planning ahead, it'll be on the 12th instead of the 19th. Moving on to subcommittee updates. Vitor, do you want to start with design review and your snow clearing meeting?
Yes, so design review did not meet, but we did have an ad hoc meeting for snow clearing and to review our letter. Barbara and I met. And it was an awesome discussion. We had a bunch of new ideas in the letter that we think is going to be just become more interesting for folks to think about snow clearing. Specifically, from last time, I remember that we added new responsibilities for business owners, as well as landlords that are renting either short terms or long term. And I think one of the interesting points that came out of that meeting is that we want to ask the candidates how they think about snow clearing and, you know, how that integrates with their platform for this year's elections. But because we can have other questions as well, right? Since we have a full committee, I think the proposition here is to go around, you know, all of us and then, you know, pick which topics we would like them to discuss and present to us as their pitch to PTAC. So maybe in the next meetings, we got to go around and figure out what we want to ask so that we can't let them forget that, you know, it's going to be November, so it's going to be warmer and people are going to be happier. But snow clearing is an issue of the city, so we need to just get them to think about it and put some propositions on the table for us to judge.
Well, so you're thinking, I'm hearing kind of two strands. One is like the snow clearing letter itself, but then two kind of connecting with candidates.
Yeah.
Just as a committee with
As a
snow
committee.
clearing as a one question,
Right.
as part of that.
How do they think about mobility for pedestrians, for public transit, how they can help us out in those sectors and it would be nice to have specific questions, I think, of the topics and issues that we want them to address. So I think for the folks, we can just start thinking about it before we reach out.
Cool, thank you. In terms of moving forward on the snow clearing letter, are you okay with adding it to the March agenda with a plan to vote on it at that meeting?
Yep.
Put it on the agenda list. And I'm also going to put a note about engaging with local candidates. Thank you, guys. All right, I'm happy to give the update for community events. We met last Monday. We reviewed the new project tracker that I put together to keep track of ongoing city projects so we can, and also state projects, so we can plan engagement opportunities that are more focused on like reviewing what's been done in addition to our engagements around reviewing ongoing project areas. We also prepared to start reaching out to potential co-organizers for our April walk audit of Union Square. We've already gotten support from 3 of those organizations who are really excited about the idea. And we're going to connect with them further for logistical planning. And then the last thing that we decided on was that we're going to AARP has a really robust library of worksheets that you can use for walk audits that kind of walk people through like the questions that they might want to consider in terms of like assessing the area that they're walking through. So we want to repurpose one of those worksheets, one for each of like the key locations that we're planning to highlight on the walk audit to spur discussion. And then help us advocate, because we're going to collect the worksheets at the end and then use that all to put together a letter for the city and elected officials to consider in terms of short-term improvements for Union Square. Those are the subcommittee updates. Anything else from anybody else in terms of subcommittees or administrative updates before we move on to kind of our main meat of the meeting? All right, great. So I'm going to kick it over to Kate, who's going to present some very exciting things about Mobility's work over the past year, their annual key performance indicators report, and then also some details on an ongoing state project to replace the Mathaway and Mystic Avenue bridges. So take it away.
Thanks, Alessandra, and good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to share with you the City of Somerville's Mobility Division's key performance indicators. This is something that we work hard on each winter, and I'll talk a little bit more about the purpose. I've prepared highlights that focus on pedestrian transit. But if you're interested, I have details of where to find the full key performance indicators presentation, which is all in the 2024, but if you'd like to look at past years. Sometimes I'm soft-spoken, so if anyone, especially those joining remotely, can't hear me, please just let me know. I don't mind you interrupting me. I really want to make sure that everyone can hear. Okay, and everyone can see the screen with the presentation?
Mhm.
Wonderful, okay. So as I mentioned, these are the things we're gonna cover this evening. I will also spend a little bit of time talking through the Massachusetts Department of Transportation's there's an update for this project called Mappa Way and Mystic Ave, and if you're not familiar with those bridge structures, that's okay. We're gonna walk through those as well as the upcoming engagement opportunities. You might have seen the slides in the update to committee members yesterday. Just want to note, I made one change right before this, which is to talk briefly about our Elm Beacon Connector concept design open house, which will be on March 10th. And can follow up with details of that, as well as flyers directly to your inbox after. So just real quickly, again, every winter we work hard to publish what we call our annual progress report. We dig into trends such as transit ridership, pedestrian, bike, and motor vehicle traffic. We look at the speed data we collected over the year, which we often do with the spring and fall time. Blue bikes ridership, reported crash data, and more. We also report on key safety deliverables, so I'll get into a little bit of the number and type of traffic calming installations that we implemented this year, along with other safety improvements. We find it really important to prepare and review these KPIs because it helps us learn about how our transportation environment is changing and see if we met our key safety goals. And those are outlined both in our Vision Zero action plan, but as well as what we hear from community members, like the committee itself. We also look to evaluate our successes as well as maybe our drawbacks and prepare for the next year. So as I mentioned, these are highlights. I've got about 20 highlights for you all, but please consider checking out the full presentation, and it's available on the city's Vision Zero website. So I'll first dig into MBTA bus ridership. So this is looking back to 2019. We are seeing regional MBTA bus ridership increase slowly, but it is still lower than what we call the pre-pandemic levels. I think we might feel that as riders ourselves, but as you can see, we are inching up higher. We've rebounded slowly, and you can see there's we're kind of plateauing between 2022 to 2024 with approximately 23,000 bus trips per day. And you can see the number of trips. And then these show the average weekday ridership for all of our bus routes. This is a combined. My apologies, I thought I had one on the specific bus routes, but if you look onto the full presentation, it actually shows you some differences on the bus routes, and our ones that are rebounding the most, I think, are the 101, the 86, which is now the Route 109 in our community, and then 90. Not the 90, sorry, I think it's the 92, but I want to double check. My apologies if this slide was included in this deck. I'll now dig into a little bit of pedestrian traffic. We've seen our highest ever evening counts in 2024. For those of you who might not be familiar or might not have already volunteered, every year around between the end of September and early October, the city does a huge volunteer effort, or we facilitate a huge effort with volunteers from our community to do pedestrian counts in both the morning and the evening at 42 locations. These are often an intersection, or it could be that if an intersection is quite busy, if you've ever done Lowell or Bedford Street at Broadway and Lagoon Square, you will often split those up so you can see only the specific turning movements. But we're really excited and wanted to show that we are just seeing some really high evening counts. We can't totally describe to you why, we just wanted to share that out to folks. One thing we wanted to note that I thought PTech in particular might be interested, I think we've had some members really interested specifically around travel to school. This is a new data point that we haven't included in some of our past KPIs, but we were able to look at there's a travel preference survey that some of our public school families are asked to take. And we learned about roughly 55% of students rely on walking and biking. We're just seeing that slow increase over time. In the larger deck, you can even see the specific percentage increase. We really wanted to show that out to PTech, as I know St. Bruce's School has been a topic of interest. Now getting into a bit more reported crashes. We are still obviously very cautiously optimistic to see crashes continue to go. We always say cautiously because we recognize that things are, things can be always changing, but our efforts are to reduce crashes and eliminate severe crashes. And we're just seeing that decrease over time in Somerville. And we do know that these are reported crashes. So the data that we use is the crash data that is put in by municipalities all across the state into the Massachusetts Department of Transportation Impact Crash Data Portal. So you could look at our community, you can also look at others. It also shows the types of crashes. But we just highlighted for you all the total number of reported. We saw 11 severe injury crashes in 2024. This is kind of similar to what we saw in 2023. We are very excited to see that it's their second year in a row of no fatal crashes. Again, always cautiously optimistic, but this is our goal to have no traffic fatalities, and that's 2 years in a row. I just specifically pulled out the pedestrian crashes. So overall, we're seeing a trend downward, but we did see a slight increase in the number from 2023 to 2024. But in the time that we've been looking over the past 11 or so years, we're still seeing kind of that trajectory go down. One thing I wanted to know, and we haven't talked as much in PTEC, I think, in the last year, is about our speed data collection. So we often collect speed data in the spring and fall, as I mentioned earlier. These are kind of generally industry best practice, as you see sometimes some of your busiest times, but also you're more consistent. So it helps us to kind of understand the general picture on a street. We don't as much lean into your more inclement weather because the percentage of time that is tends to be lower, or as well as the really quiet times, which are summer in our community. We highlighted a batch of streets where we collected traffic data primarily in the spring. Some of these are based on constituent inquiries, traffic calming petitions, or where we've either recently done work or preparing to do work. You'll see Walnut Street North is actually indicating where it was. We recently have a community path crossing there. That was really important for us to understand what speeds are going on. Same with Cross Street. We recently installed speed humps and installed clear corners. So this is the reason of why we selected these streets. We wanted to particularly highlight, there's a couple of different factors, and if you're interested in digging into that speed data, I recommend looking at some of our traffic calming assessments available on the traffic calming page. But this this specific indicator is really helpful for us to think about safety interventions. Is looking at the number of streets, the number of vehicles where they're traveling over 25 miles per hour. Right, that's when it's a kind of like signal to us that this is an unsafe condition. And as you can see, if we look at a Harrison Street or Ivaloo Street, which is a street that we collected data on based on a traffic calming petition we received, we felt a little bit more comfortable recommending not installing traffic calming installations at this time, as we're seeing a very low number of that. If you're interested in more, we're just seeing rather low average speeds. But as you see, right, as we go a little bit more down in the chart, our Cedar Streets, Powderhouse Boulevard, and Packard, we're just seeing a higher number. And Middlesex Ave, which is a very high volume high vehicle volume street, we see a significant amount of speeding. I know PTEC has also been discussing a lot about enforcement, and this is some new data we have available. If you're interested in digging more, the Somerville Police Department Public Data Dashboard facilitated by the Department of Somerset and SPD. Actually produced this recent data that helped us understand the amount of citations. And these are kind of put in large buckets, right? We know that there can be a little bit more in these. But I think that has been a topic of interest, is just showing the number of citations issued by type. And we just saw there was a drop in that in 2022, and that's increased again in 2024. Now getting into some of our strategies, we're really excited to share that we built more than 100 traffic calming features in 2024. This is really important to improve safety and respond to resident demand. We were able to categorize these by the type. I'm just going to go through and just find a little bit what are the different traffic calming interventions we mean. A neighborhood traffic circle is a tool that we use recently on Pearl Street, Glen Street, and then Glen and Oliver. This is a tool that we saw very low stop sign compliance at those locations. But it was that neighborhood traffic circle, even though it's a circle, it's not a mini rotary. You're able to take a left in front, but it was something we were testing in that project to encourage folks to slow down and stop at that location. Crossing island is something you might see on College Ave at Kidder, on Temple Street at Sewell Heath. If that waiting space that allows it when you cross one lane, to pause before you cross another. A raised intersection, right, could be a 4-leg crosswalk, all raised, sidewalk height. And a raised crosswalk is similar, but just for the crossing in particular. A curb extension is where we've expanded the sidewalk to push out to where you might, let's say if it's a street with parking, it might push out an extra like 6 feet or more to allow you to wait further out and see around, as well as for people driving to be able to see pedestrians more. And the speed hump, those are a bit clear. These are when we put big asphalt mounds on the street to slow people down. We've really been able to increase this program. And the biggest jumps we saw this year were raised crosswalks, curb extensions, and speed humps. I wanted to highlight in particular some of the data that we collected around pre and post speed hump installation. We showed this, I believe 2 years ago too, but these are some new locations. So in particular on Cross Street, we saw, and right, that 25 mile per hour is really that big signal to us. We saw that rate of speeding drop from 36% to 6%. On Marshall Street, we saw a drop from 22% to 13%. On Florence Street, we saw a 20% drop to 3%. So really excited to see that decrease. It also helps us to understand just like how traffic changes once we test out some of these different installations. A new metric that we haven't included before, but thought would be really interesting for PTech is to see the amount of miles of sidewalk that we're reconstructing. When we reconstruct a sidewalk, this is completely redoing it. It could be, so that's you're pouring brand new concrete. It could, you could also be creating new, installing new granite, right? The granite's really beat up on the curb. That could be installing new. It's a Vision Zero goal to have approximately 2 miles. And we've really been meeting that goal and sometimes exceeding it in our reconstruction projects. And then I also wanted to highlight our pedestrian signal upgrades. So we replaced push buttons and countdown timers at 16 signals this past year. In this map, if you have the opportunity to look at the slides, which should be in your inbox as well as available in the meeting material, you can zoom in on the specific locations. It's really important to our traffic engineers to make these upgrades at critical signalized intersections. Bringing us to transit signal priority, we're really looking to, make more reliable bus service. And so we've upgraded 6 transit signals and built 11 in-lane bus stops. We use the term in-lane or floating bus stop if there's a bike lane. This is right when we push that sidewalk out and create dedicated space for people riding the bus, and that the bus no longer has to pull over and then pull back into the travel lane. So that you can just kind of reduce that delay a little bit as a bus is picking up or dropping off riders. So again, I know that was a lot, and I'm also happy to take any questions or refer to any specific slides. I can also pull up the full deck if anyone wants to dig into more. But if you're interested in checking out, included in our KPIs, we talk about the number of outreach events, we look at bike count data trends. There's some more data around transit if you want to look into the specific routes. We've done some preliminary red light running data, and actually got some really good feedback after we released the KPIs last month around how we could even rethink collecting that data. We're really trying to learn what is the best way, right? I think we've all experienced red light running as a pedestrian. It's something that we know we care about, but actually quantifying it and evaluating it at intersections can be challenging depending on how you determine someone is quote unquote running the red light, right? Is it after it's turned, if it's still kind of yellow, but once they cross the stoplight, is it red? Or is it just purely red? Or is it the percentage of time that this is occurring versus the number of times? Sorry, I digress. We also looked at the number and types of increase. If you're interested to just hear what we hear from people, we were able to quantify, we received constituent increase by email and by 311. And we went through, categorized them, and could determine what are people kind of reaching out to us about, maybe outside of your project specific. One thing I want to know is that we get a significant amount about traffic calming, but probably 3 times more are requests for traffic calming rather than complaints. I mean, so complaints are often about the height or the maybe lack of visibility. And more. So if you're interested in digging that in, I encourage folks, but we just sampled some today. Because I think we can really get into it with the large deck.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. Do you mind if we pause here?
Yeah.
For questions? Okay, awesome. I have a quick one, and then I see you. So just in terms of bus ridership, are we expecting ridership to rebound even further with the bus network redesign in both phase 1 and then subsequent phases? And then if, I mean, I guess regardless of the answer to that, are there like any additional strategies that the MBTA is planning on using to increase ridership or us as a city?
Those are great questions. I'll answer the first around, are we anticipating increased ridership with bus network redesign? We actually were able to have some preliminary talks with folks at the T, just to hear what are you learning or seeing in the initial, I think at the time it was my apologies. 4 weeks after bus network redesign or had implemented the Route 109. And they're looking at both, are there changes to ridership, but in particular looking at are the like what they call it is like the miles traveled changing, because what they want to understand is that are they able to reduce the amount of transfers someone is going on, right? If you could take the 109 and you live in Everett and you're getting to your job in Harvard, they feel like that's a positive versus than just the number. So it was interesting to kind of hear from them how they're thinking about evaluating success, which is interesting for us as a city to learn, because we want to encourage more folks to travel to the city by sustainable ways, but creating, creating safe options. And so learning, oh, wow, is someone getting an easier path? And how do we help facilitate that? And then we were also asking what are ways that help support ridership? And they are looking at a whole bunch of stuff, and I think transit signal priority is one, right, as we potentially look at phase 2. Which we don't have specific details, but could look at like additional routes in Somerville. But also the experience. We were trying to get initial feedback around the Route 109 runs along Western Washington Street, where we recently installed the floating bus stops. So how are they feeling about that? And a very preliminary like evaluation showed that they were just seeing reduced delay at the stop. And so that made them feel good that it's making potentially people feel like this is a reliable service. If you are traveling between Harvard and Union Square, it is a very quick experience right now. And they are meeting those goals of the 5 to 15 minute headways. So I took a roundabout way. I think we are looking at increased ridership, but it was interesting to learn that maybe that shouldn't be our only marker of is it a success.
Does that like change how you might report on data like next year, for example?
Yeah, I think potentially we do rely on the MBTA for that type of data, whereas ridership is like, it's easier to quantify, right? If you could just say, hey, we know this many people are taking this route in the city, or looking at boarding and alightings, but being able to calculate the, it's not vehicle miles traveled, but it's a similar indicator.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, what was the second question again?
You answered both of them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so folks can feel free to put up their hands, but I saw Julian first.
My question is in reference to the slide that talks about the pedestrian countdowns and push signals being replaced.
Yeah.
What specifically have those been replaced or changed with?
That's a great question. So, most of our signals, when you go to a traffic signal primarily in Somerville, you don't have to press the button to actuate the pedestrian phase.
Yeah.
But we recognize that if you go to one of our signals, if there is no audio capability and you have visual impairments, it's hard to know, oh, the pedestrian phase is on. And so we've been looking to install more pedestrian push buttons that have that audio capability so that oh, I'm in the wait period as I wait to cross. and then I have the go period. Right now, we're doing this primarily, you'll see it at Bow and Summer. There's one from a while. Bow and Summer was a new one. But if you also, and sorry, I'm a Ward 2/Ward 3 resident, so I'm very familiar with those signals. If you go to the one right at Ward and Somerville, it's the same thing. There's that audio countdown in between, and then the audio sound if you press the button to indicate that the pedestrian phase is on. Secondly, the countdown timers, that's the other thing, is that you might go to one and some it's just either the walk sign, and you don't actually know how much time you have to cross. So we kind of paired it with push button improvements, and that now you can see a countdown timer instead of just the pedestrian, like the pedestrian and then the hand.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, thank you for asking. Our traffic engineer is so happy you asked.
Joel, I see your hand online. Oh, do you need to be allowed to talk? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just did it.
Okay, great, thank you.
I was wondering how much of do you have an idea of how much of this is because of the Green Line extension? Because I know I was looking at the data for individual routes and I saw that the ones with the steepest drop-offs are the ones that kind of parallel the Green Line. Because I was looking at yeah, and also I know I've used the buses a lot less now because of the electric blue bikes. So are you factoring in like how much of that is related to it?
No, that's a great question. I mean, I think Route 80 has remained kind of consistent in comparisons from like post 2019, but like prior to Green Line and after, which I think mirrors the Green Line the most. I think where we've been surprised is where like Route 87 is kind of stayed a little bit more consistent. And it doesn't mirror some of those. And then where we actually saw some changes were ones where we had a lot higher, like, goodness, actually, you know what, I can pull up this slide, but we can't necessarily attribute it to just the Green Line. One interesting feedback we did get, if anyone's interested, this is anecdotal, is that someone had told us that with the change from the Route 109, they actually find it faster to travel on the Route 109 to the Orange Line to get to downtown Boston than to take the Green Line, which was just super interesting feedback as we learn what are potentially peak patterns changing, right? If you know the Green Line might be coming more, or sorry, the 109 comes every 5 minutes. And you might live right outside that route versus walking all the way to one of the stations. So Joe, I think I kind of answered your question, but we can't really attribute it to anything. I think the closest we have right now is we still feel like the kind of growth and hybrid work is probably the most impactful to our ridership changes. Other questions? Yes.
I have one more in reference to the figure about cars going 25 miles per hour or above on certain streets. Do we also have statistics about what the vehicle throughput is on the streets, just to like contextualize, because some of the streets are just gonna have more traffic themselves than others?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, so when we get this volume data, and speed data, so we collect them through automatic traffic recorders and turning movement counts. This one's just automatic traffic recorders. So we can look at the total and then we can dissect by speed. So we looked at, because sometimes it's interesting too, because we can do it by percentage, but if we showed it, the percentage, like you're telling different stories. And I think we were just curious to know what is the number of speeding on these select. But we do know that total.
Is there a place where I could find that?
Maybe not for all of these, but if you're interested in looking at on a case basis, Lexington Ave is highlighted on this chart. Lexington Ave is one where we prepared a traffic calming assessment in response to a petition. And in that we watched through the full thing. So what was the vehicle volume? What was the, we looked at kind of, we could bucket the speeds, like how many vehicles were actually going under 15 miles per hour. And then the total, then this indicator.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Related to other data sources for us, we just saw this recent article at the Globe for talking about falls and ice-related injuries. Data from ER departments and hospitals. I wonder if we can start collecting those as well, because part of that relates to our public infrastructure. And knowing those numbers go up and down, even though they might not be as granular as we would like them to be, would be interesting to just track and see if you're enhancing our, pedestrian safety from that side.
Boy, so it's, because I saw the same article in the Globe.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the paper said essentially, it's essentially saying that they're seeing 3 times more falls and fractures related to ice and snow than on a regular winter storm or winter season. And those data points are important. Of course, they don't separate between public and private infrastructures. That's that. But we could use those numbers as well to just measure how well we're doing with specifically sidewalks and, maybe parks and some of the, community path kind of infrastructures.
I think that would be interesting. Are you, I'm just thinking about, because we don't actually technically have any hospitals in Somerville. So we would be relying on Boston-based
Yeah.
Hospitals, or I mean, we can also look at urgent cares.
Urgent care.
But it would be like, so Somerville specific falls
Yeah.
following the major storms that we have now.
It seems that they are tracking, at least Tufts Medical is tracking.
Yeah, so
They might already
specific-
have that data available. We just need to ask.
Yeah, but I think it's making sure that we're getting Somerville specific, correct?
Right.
So we would have to ask them for the number, but then also if
Get
it can
them
be
down.
location specific.
Yeah.
I can inquire, there could be some trickiness around that, but I'm happy to just or bring it back to our team and explore what we can find.
Nice.
Well, I just, if there's no other questions on, the KPIs, I just wanna, call out the very exciting stat that no fatal injuries, were had in Somerville this year as last year. It's just really, really gratifying to see that we are, moving in the right direction and that we did not unnecessarily lose any lives this year on our streets, so.
Well, good things there. We're really excited about that. Wonderful, thank you all for listening and being interested in these KPIs. I wanted to now touch upon the Mystic, my apologies, the Mystic Mock-up project. Just gonna do a quick overview. So we provided a map that kind of talks through where this location is. I'm also gonna describe it. So the Moffaway Bridge and Mystic Ave Bridge carry vehicle, bicycle, pedestrian transit traffic over the Orange Line and commuter rail tracks in Boston and Somerville. All right, so we're not talking about 93. We're talking about like that kind of next layer down under 93 that goes over the tracks. There's that one's closer to us, right? That's kind of where our Broadway terminates. That's where Moffat Bridge is. And Mystic Bridge is right at the beginning of Mystic Ave with Assembly kind of in your north. It's right at the Somerville Boston City line. And it's approximately on the east side of both bridges. So we've been working closely with MassDOT, but also City of Boston. And this construction project will replace these 2 deteriorated bridge structures. So this is just the bridge part, but some of their work has been also looking at movement onto the bridge. And so what are some safety improvements? Community members and city staff requested that improved transit, pedestrian, and bicycle connections be incorporated into this project to better connect the 2 cities to each other and to bus and rapid transit services. Although primarily a bridge replacement project, it will set the cross-section for these key connections between Somerville and Boston and is once generation opportunity to ensure the best possible design as well as future flexibility. So we as City of Somerville have advocated to MassDOT for lower design speeds, general purpose lane drops, dedicated transit lanes, transit signal priority, wider sidewalks, and separated bicycle facilities. We also included a snapshot of kind of this location in the MBTA bus network redesign. And as you can see, we already know Sullivan Square is a huge hub for bus activity, which is how many routes pass through. Bridge replacement work began in 2024 while the final design for the surface was still being developed. This allowed for continued conversations about multimodal design to take place without holding up critical bridge replacements. So phase 1 construction began in spring 2024, which reconstructed half of both bridges. Phase 2 construction will begin in spring 2025, which will reconstruct the other half of both bridges. Both phases have been coordinated with the MBTA shutdowns to perform critical work while trains are not operating below structures. So what we mean by that, right, is that if we knew that there were going to be some of those closures, or sorry, the MBTA and MassDOT, those two project teams work together to then get both construction crews in. Both bridges are expected to be fully open in summer 2026, with final completion expected by the end of 2026. Previous public information meetings have shared proposed cross sections for both bridges. And we've showed those snapshots to the right. And that 2026 right is to signify the installation around 2026. Somerville's continued to advocate for further design improvements. And we're excited, right, for this next stage, which is when MassDOT is coming back with the next, the kind of next, or the further developed design. We've highlighted there's 2 public meetings, and you might be already aware, these are next week. And Monday, there is one located in Charlestown at the Shroud City Center Cafe. And one in February 26th at 6, right here at the Central Public Library. So they will share updates as well as an updated design for multimodal transportation improvements. Maybe I'll pause there and for any questions.
Do you know, I mean, this is probably too specific into the design, but for the Mystic Ave final condition, do you know if there's gonna be, like, what kind of separation is there gonna be between the pedestrian side of the path and the cycling side of the path?
Oh, that's a great question. Without seeing the final designs, I'm not sure. I believe because it's raised, there won't be that vertical separation. I'm not sure what kind of like at this on the base of the sidewalk, what delineation they're using.
Okay. Any other questions on this project? Comments? I do hope that some folks will go to next week's meeting if they are interested or live in the area. Since it'll be right here at the library.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, I'm not sure what virtual opportunity. I know we've gotten some of that question from some community members. But I think it's something that if we continue to urge MassDOT, if folks are interested, well, please continue. I think they had done primarily only virtual, and there was some kind of negative, or folks were kind of like, that feels strange to not have any in person in some of the MassDOT projects. And I think this is their kind of, move, but I think they're always looking for feedback on that. Sorry, Christopher, I see your hand too.
I was just wondering, I know there has been proposals to look at bike paths on a dead rail right of way going from Assembly through Sullivan and then down connecting to the community path. Has there been any look at, when working on these bridges to make it so that a connection with that potential path could be integrated, or is that outside of the scope?
To my knowledge, I know there's been a lot of thought put into connecting two facilities heading into Assembly, as well as looking at safety improvements kind of in the, Broadway, Lombardy way. In terms of the one that connects further to the community path, I'm not sure, but I know very specifically to, Broadway and to, was that Grand Union at the end? Or on the other side of Lombardy. Yeah, I think yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Brenda.
Sorry, I'm just looking at the diagram for the Mystic Ave Bridge, and it seems like the shoulder is like really humongous, and I'm wondering if any more space could be allotted to, the bikes and pedestrians who might be using that bridge, or if that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's something that we really urged them in the last, in that, when this was released last publicly, that was something that we really asked for. It's a big change for MassDOT to move away from these large shoulders. But we're excited that hopefully there's been some movement to reclaim some of that space.
Gotcha, perfect, thanks.
Good question, Brenda.
Anyone else? All right, we can finish this out. Cool. Just want to lastly note, this is in addition, just last minute, if you all didn't, see some of the public notes that have gone out, we announced this week that we are hosting an open house for the Elm Beacon Connector concept design. This is something we talked about briefly in the fall, when we launched this project. It's a project for new protected bike lanes on Elm Street between Russell Street and Somerville Ave. Somerville Ave between Acadia Park and Elm Street, and that bit of Beacon Street, that there's no protected bike facilities between Somerville Ave and Oxford Street. In addition, it's also to look at Mawson's neighbor way from Mawson Street, along with crosswalk improvements and potential bus stop changes, sorry, not, this is just quick build. But we're really excited to bring the concept design to the community and encourage anyone that's interested to join us for the open house. Even though I know there'll be continued discussion at PTAC, but it's a great opportunity to dive more into the project. And ask questions about the design, but also hear from community members about what they're feeling about the design.
I will be there because I live around the corner, so very excited about this project.
Lovely food. So, enjoy it. Thank you.
Cool, thank you so much, Kate. So exciting to see all the work that's happening. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, which is to do a brief review of the PTAC annual report. And for that, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Folks have had a little bit of time to review this since we had originally planned to look at it last month, but didn't have time in our meeting. So I'm just going to briefly run through the report. It starts as always with a list of our committee members, a letter from the chair, which I started drafting, just talking about like the uncertainty of our political moment across the country, but kind of the hope in regrounding ourselves in local advocacy and kind of continuing to engage where we actually have a fair amount of agency, which gives me hope in some difficult times. And then I would also, I'm planning to incorporate some data from the KPI report that Kate just described, so that is forthcoming before we publish. Moves on to describe areas of activity in 2024. Our focus area was kind of on committee development because we were so happy to welcome our 8 new members who've already taken on several leadership roles within the committee. So just describing the process for onboarding everybody and our subcommittee reevaluation efforts that we have implemented thus far, I think successfully. Describing the letters that we wrote, the 4 that we wrote over the year, with additional progress that's been made on each of them. We gave feedback on 6 projects in 2024, both at the state and the city level. We welcomed almost 60 guests, unique guests across the year to our meetings, which I was very proud of. And that included Somerville residents, safe streets advocates, city staff, transportation planners, elected officials, and urban planning students, including folks who gave presentations at our meetings. We hosted 8 events, including 2 community walks, how many tablings? 5 tablings and 1 social gathering. And in terms of progress on our 2024 goals, we saw the accomplishment of 5 of the goals that we set for ourselves. We made progress on 1. We saw progress made on 1 of them, which was the bus network redesign progress. And then a fair number of them that we did not get to or we didn't see updates on. But like one of them was extending the green line. So some of them were pretty, pretty high level goals. So I think, you know, where we did actually have agency to make change and engage, I think we took advantage of most of those opportunities. And then just in terms of looking ahead to 2025, I pulled together the kind of the feedback that we had generated about goals for this year back at our December meeting, I believe, and just listed them out in no particular order. So engaging more in school mobility, engaging more in community path safety, especially safety between people walking and people biking, monitoring the progress of the parking and curb use study, which we started to do a little bit already in January, but we are planning on inviting the parking department staff to one of our upcoming meetings to talk further about that project and its rollout. Monitoring the progress of no turn on red sign installation, which we engaged on, I think, in either 2023 or 2024, I can't remember which, but tracking the progress of that. The bus shelter improvements, tracking those as well that have been funded by participatory budgeting. Having engagement efforts around completed projects, which we've already started kind of trying to wrap our head around with the project tracker that I built. Advocating for continued improvements to Green Line station areas, developing concrete stances and next steps around enforcement, which the next agenda item speaks to directly. And then finally, continuing to explore the feasibility of a transit connector, a north-south transit connector in Somerville. And then just quickly ending by a section on how to get involved. Preston added a really, a comment that raised something that I was not aware of, which is that it sounds like new committee members did not get sworn in or have to do like conflict of interest training, which I'm going to talk to mobility about in our officer meeting. So we'll get some clarity on kind of what the expectations are for new member onboarding with those two processes specifically. So stay tuned on that. And thank you to Preston in his absence for raising that. Any comments, questions, things that are missing, things that you feel are incorrectly characterized in this report? Or do you feel comfortable, at least once I finish the finishing touches on the letter from the chair, do you feel comfortable publishing to our website and sharing with our community? Yeah.
I just have a quick question. What exactly is meant by the North-South Somerville Transit Connector here?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. So this is a effort that we've taken an interest on in PTAC, but has also been worked on by other community groups in the area. But it's basically recognizing that because of the difficult topography of our city, where the middle of our city is quite steep, we don't have good transit connections between the north of our city and the south of our city. So most of our transit goes east-west or west-east. So it's exploring options for maybe smaller transit vehicles that could traverse the hills to better connect residents between, you know, say Mystic Ave to Union Square, for example. Does that characterize it well? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Thoughts? Does anyone hate it?
I think the letter is awesome.
Okay, great. Well then, seeing none, I guess I'll take a vote on it just to be sure, but I'm gonna move to make the final changes to the letter from the chair and then publish this on our PTAC website. Do I have a second?
This is Victor, I second.
Vitor. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, great. Thank you all so much for another successful year of our committee. And we're moving into our, I think, 6th year of existence, which is wild to think about. So now we're gonna move on to our final agenda item of the evening. And I think my battery is holding out, thank goodness. Thank you. I think we should be good. But the last thing that I wanted to do was present our enforcement survey results. So just as a quick reminder, we had so several PTAC members in recent months have expressed interest in working on enforcement related activities in 2025. And at our last meeting, we voted to administer an internal survey of our members just to gauge our views on enforcement, because it's such a wide-ranging topic, but also a fairly controversial one that we kind of thought might be a little difficult to just discuss openly in terms of sharing our exact thoughts on it in a public meeting. So the goal of the survey is to kind of understand where PTAC members are interested in working and hopefully develop some sort of strategy about how to move forward on this topic. So I just checked the survey and saw that 2 more committee members had shared their thoughts, which is great, and thank you for doing that. But just know that I have not gotten a chance to incorporate those 2 pieces of feedback or responses into this report. Just on quick glance, I don't think that they significantly changed the results of this survey, but I will update the report and send out the most up-to-date version, hopefully over the weekend. But I think the vast majority of this will still be quite relevant, regardless. So with 12 committee members taking the survey, I'm gonna do a quick little math. That means we have a 71% response rate, which is pretty good. So the first question asked about what folks thought the role of enforcement should be in street safety. And the answers ranged widely in terms of free text responses. There were originally 9 responses that I had analyzed. 3 of them suggested a desire for strong enforcement efforts. One of them called enforcement perhaps the only meaningful tool to address repeat offenders. And one answer called for consequences against traffic law violations. 3 answers suggested kind of a more moderate approach to enforcement. There was a desire to address dangerous driving behavior where it occurs despite engineering and design interventions. Although one answer expressed concern about bias and confrontation and shared support for automated enforcement because of that bias. And then there was a desire to shift in-person policing from SUVs to walking and biking so that there was more closeness to vulnerable road users. And then the final 3 answers suggested a desire for pretty minimal enforcement. One wanted enforcement officers to do less than they're currently doing. There was a concern expressed about the lack of evidence that traditional enforcement keeps our streets safer. But there was also support for automated enforcement, even in those kind of minimal enforcement answers. In terms of when asked what relationship folks thought that enforcement has with physically changing our streets, the vast majority of people thought that enforcement was less important than physically changing our streets, but still a necessary element of street safety. One person did indicate that enforcement is equally important as physically changing our streets. I believe there's an additional one with the one of the newer responses, so 2 people indicated that. And then one person kind of shared a custom answer saying that they thought that only automated enforcement was a useful addition to the street safety toolkit. And then no one chose the answer that said that enforcement was not important at all, and we should only focus on visibly changing our streets. In terms of who our members thought should be responsible for street safety enforcement activities, there was broad, almost universal support for city officials, both SPD officers and parking staff, to review automatically generated citations that had been generated through automated enforcement systems. There was some support for SPD officer, like in-person enforcement happening by SPD's officers. Also some support for in-person parking control officers to do the enforcement. And then, you know, a little bit of support for having some human, whether, you know, outside of SPD and parking staff, but someone in the city reviewing those automated citations, and then a little bit of support for automated citations that had no human review. So just kind of as soon as they got tracked with the camera, they went out. And then one committee member submitted a custom response saying that they would be supportive of having SPD and parking staff review community generated submissions. So like kind of a 3-1-1 model of submitting like violations, for example. I think that covered that. In terms of areas that folks are interested in exploring regarding enforcement on PTAC, I'm realizing this is pretty small, so let me increase my zoom in a little bit. The areas that got the most support by far were those focused on automated enforcement. So you can see that there's kind of almost universal support among respondents for advocating for automated enforcement, including automated enforcement of blocked bus lanes, as well as implementing more safety sticks in the city for automated parking enforcement. There were moderate levels of support for kind of shifting advocating for SPD officers to shift from SUVs to foot and bike patrols, as well as advocating for the enabling of civilian flagging operations, which would allow members of the public to basically staff construction operations and like flag on the streets for those, because currently our state only allows for law enforcement officers to serve in those positions. Also moderate levels of support for ensuring that or advocating that the crossing guard program be fully staffed, for continuing to engage on the municipal road safety grant, and for working with SPD to educate them on working with persons with disabilities, although there was a comment about that role in particular being more appropriate for the Somerville Commission for Persons with Disabilities rather than for our committee. And then there was the least amount of support for advocating for SPD capacity and staffing increases. And I think it's worth noting that there were 2 respondents who voiced explicit opposition to advocating for those staffing and capacity increases. One of those respondents noted that they'd just rather see resources differently allocated, or have those enforcement issues moved to non-first responder staff. While another respondent, they cited an independent study of SPD staffing levels that was recently commissioned by the city, which suggested that SPD is currently overstaffed. And they noted that the SPD's department budget is currently about 17 times larger than mobility's budget. So again, I think there's very high levels of support for those automated enforcement operations on our committee. And just want to note that in terms of automated enforcement, there was recent legislation to legalize automated enforcement against blocked bus lanes. But we would need to continue to do state level advocacy on legalization of automated enforcement against moving vehicles, which we certainly could do. And then the safety stick program is up and running in Somerville. So it'd be, you know, working with the parking department and mobility presumably also to see what kinds of areas are most appropriate for more safety sticks and what kind of, you know, funding and capacity will be needed to scale up that program. Let's see what else we have. Oh, other comments. There was like a free text field for other thoughts folks wanted to share. And 2 of them, I think were kind of grouped together. They suggested this kind of ambivalence around enforcement, where on the one hand, folks were concerned about equity, and a worry that kind of these high visibility enforcement efforts would focus on poor and minority road users, instead of kind of focusing on the dangerous driving behavior of larger SUVs and trucks. But on the other hand, you know, they express concern that walking is becoming more dangerous, they feel. And they were also concerned about recent public comments that were shared in our meetings and at some of our tabling events about traffic calming measures causing road rage, and they were interested in data from the city to show that Somerville's interventions were not causing more risky behavior. So this kind of two-sided desire around enforcement, where there were concerns, but also I think some desire to see more regulation of dangerous driving behavior. And then just two kind of miscellaneous responses. One kind of underscored this desire for human review of automated enforcement citations. And another expressed a hope that PTAC could, quote, serve as the voice of pedestrians in discussions that are generally about cars and bigger vehicles. And then I copied out all the full responses to long form questions, which you can also see at the full report, like the actual survey in our shared drive. So that is those are the survey results. We do not have to decide like next steps tonight, or, you know, come up with a strategy based on these results tonight. But it would be useful to understand, like, one, if folks have just general reactions to the results. Two, if folks want to express, you know, support for, you know, kind of moving in a particular direction or advocating on a particular topic, or if you have ideas about like the next steps that we might take to actionize these results. So floor is open on any of those things.
I think the obvious path forward is to collect the answers where we had unanimous consent to address, and just go for them.
Yeah.
And then see how the other ones would affect our planning moving forward. It's always easier to go for the things that we have, you know, unanimous agreement on.
Totally. Yeah, which I think it's pretty clear that like the vast majority of our committee members are at least excited to work on automated enforcement. One thing that I was thinking on that front is like we could try seeing if some of our state reps would be willing to come to our meeting, like Mike Connolly or Pat Jalen, just to talk through like the process of passing the blocked bus lane legislation and talk about like the prospects of the remaining moving vehicle enforcement bills. Cause I mean, we wrote advocacy letters on those many years ago, and the bills are still in the legislature, but it would be great to get a direct update from them at some point.
We could also get them from the mayor candidates.
Yeah.
And it's not their thing, but you know, they can help drive this discussion forward.
Others, thoughts, anything surprising that you didn't expect to see in the survey results?
I was surprised that we were so evenly split on the role of enforcement. This is Brenda, by the way, sorry. It's just interesting, and it just shows that we have a diverse group of people with lots of different opinions.
Yeah, definitely. Which is honestly, I mean, I realize that this is kind of a tangent, but it's just one of my favorite parts of being on this committee is talking to people who have very different like life experiences and views and beliefs. And I think it's a example of like beautiful nonpartisanship and working together. All right, seeing little discussion, Is anybody like opposed to, for the time being, focusing our efforts on automated enforcement advocacy? Perhaps, you know, revitalizing some letters, inviting our state reps, working with the parking department on more safety sticks. Is anybody opposed to moving down that, going down that direction?
This is Meredith. I'm definitely not opposed to that at all. I think that's a great direction to go in. I do think it would be worth discussing some of the sort of more points of variability sort of on human enforcement at some point, but I think that direction is a great starting point.
Can you say more about the variability, Meredith?
Oh yeah, just like the initial question, like to your point, like the sort of even split on sort of the role of police in enforcement. I think like there is probably more discussion to be had there, and sort of unpacking what stance we might take as a committee, if any, sort of beyond this initial survey. But yeah, I just think it could be like a useful area to discuss more at some point.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Do you think, I mean, you don't have to have like totally fully formed thoughts at this point, but like, do you think that's just another committee discussion? Or is that like, what kind of venue do you think would be helpful for that sort of conversation?
I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I have well-formed thoughts there. I worry a little bit about like sort of seeing a area where like there's conflicting opinions and then just like dropping it entirely instead of sort of digging in a little bit more.
Yeah. That's very fair.
So maybe it's a small breakout discussion of people who have strong opinions, or, you know, and then maybe it comes back to the committee, or maybe we just have another discussion in the committee. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if we could get like kind of a representative from like each of the three groups to participate in like some sort of like facilitated discussion. That in a way that isn't, again, that isn't as like intimidating as like a full committee meeting, but that kind of like gets at some of the more meatiness of each of the stances in some way. I don't know. I think we can keep thinking about it for sure. Anyone else, ideas? All right, great. So I think we can kind of move in two directions. One is plan for some more advocacy and guests to focus on automated enforcement, but then also I will definitely commit. I think we can talk in our next officer meeting about strategizing around how to further interrogate kind of these differences of opinion on just the role of enforcement broadly on our committee. But thank you all so much for taking the survey. I think it was really, really helpful. And I am glad that we have kind of a, at least a preliminary strategy moving forward on this topic. And I think that that's our agenda, unless anybody is here to give public comment. Seeing none. Awesome. Then you can all have 13 more minutes of your night back. Thank you so much for being here. We will reconvene in March, again, probably virtual only. But have a really wonderful rest of your evening and month until then.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Okay.